Hi, folks. I'm Denise Howell. And next up on Triangulation, Shel Israel joins me. He's an author and consultant. And we're going to go way back to 1956 and 120 years into the future to discuss AI, immersive technologies, the intersection between the two, and when, if ever, any of these technologies will be safely ready for prime time. Join us on Triangulation.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Triangulation, episode 415, recorded September 20th, 2019. Shel Israel. This episode of Triangulation is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring isn't easy, but there's one place you can go where hiring is simple and smart. That place is ZipRecruiter, where growing businesses connect to qualified candidates. Try it free at ziprecruiter.com/triangulation. Hi, folks. I'm Denise Howell, and you're here joining me and Shel Israel for Triangulation today. Shel is an author, a consultant, a general person who knows things, knows lots of things about cutting-edge technologies. And it's such a pleasure to have you here on the show today, Shel.
Thank you, Denise. I hope I don't fall apart after that intro, but thank you.
I have followed your career as a knower of things for many a long year. We were trying to decide before the show whether we've actually met face-to-face before. We're not quite 100% sure that that's ever happened. So I'm thrilled to have the chance to sit down and have a lengthy and fun conversation with you here today. Which is, of course, the format of this show. We get together with big thinkers in the realm of technology and tech journalism and innovation and consider things. So today, what prompted me to want to sit down and consider things with you today, Shel, is you do a wonderful newsletter that people should subscribe to if they are not already doing so. It is called ISTM, which stands for It Seems to Me. And you recently did a send about human-augmented AI that I found pretty fascinating and a good jumping off point. Just sort of for getting into what you're thinking about, pondering, paying attention to these days. I know you're working on a new book, right?
Yeah, that's kind of working slowly on it, but it's along the theme of this talk, which the working title is Augmenting People, Why It Should Back Us Up Rather Than Push Us Out.
So for a while there, you seem to be paying a lot of attention to AR and VR. And in fact, before the show, there's another great podcast that I listened to sort of touch base with what you've been working on and thinking lately. And it was on the XR podcast. And it was last year. Mm-hmm. Very good talk there. And I'm just wondering, before we get into talking about AI, or maybe as we blend the two, because there are intersections, what's going on in the realms of AR and VR? And do you think they're as exciting as you did for a while? Because it seemed to be your primary focus there for a bit.
Well, the primary focus was for a book that came out a few years ago called The Fourth Transformation. And in 2016, I was a genius who predicted that by about this time, the center of our digital life would be something that looked like the eyeglasses I'm wearing today rather than the phone, which is the current center of digital life. And since we're still all looking at our phones and not through glasses, I obviously wasn't quite right. AR or immersive technology, rather than going into all the XR and VR and AR variables, it will come along, but I think it will be far more slowly than I thought it would be and predicted in the book. But meanwhile, AI is like oxygen. It is becoming part of all things digital. It's transformational to business and to society. And while AR and VR are still important to me, and I still write about it, and I still follow it, and I'm involved with two organizations, AWE and VRAR, I'm much more focused on where AI is going, and I'm probably at this point enthused and alarmed to equal portions, which goes back to that blog post you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Enthused and alarmed in equal portions. And what that reminds me of is something hopefully you got a chance to see. I shot a couple of links, not Carson's way, but Anthony's way in the studio before the show. And one of them is to this incredible pointer that we had from Harry McCracken over at Fast Company to a 1960 television chat, much like the chat we're having here today, that was all about the subject of machine learning and artificial intelligence in the year 1960. The guest was Jerome B. Wiesner, who was then director of MIT's Research Laboratory of Electronics, and later MIT's president. And he was interviewed by David Wayne, who's an actor that as soon as you pull this thing up and start watching it, if you're a certain age, you'll recognize him. And I haven't made my way through the whole thing. It's rather lengthy. I think I'm about 3/4 of the way through. But I'm wondering if you got the chance to take a look at this at all, either the article or the video or both.
See, we were told not to talk over each other, and I just committed that sin. I was busy before this show reconfiguring my computer so I could be on this show, so I didn't see this. I didn't know you sent it to me. But this is even before I got interested in it. As a matter of fact, it's when I was still in high school and the wheel was being developed. So some people had a real vision of what would go on. I'm looking at the visuals, as are the people who are actually watching Twit TV. And I can see what they're illustrating, and it's all part of the issues that we're still talking about.
Well, that was the thing that was so fascinating to me about this video, is that it's still timely. I mean, yes, it is so quaint and hokey, and one of them smoking a pipe and the other one smoking a cigarette, and it is definitely of its era, 1960. But when you get into the substance of what they're talking about, I mean, I'm sure the field has come leaps and bounds. In fact, there's no doubt that it has in the interim. One of the use cases they show is a gentleman playing chess against the computer. And of course, the computer not chess, checkers. Chess was too much at that point, but checkers worked. And various other things, handwriting recognition and other things. But there's a lot of talk about the brain and the way it works and how biological entities learn and what is instinct and what is learned and how that all factors into machine learning. And so I commend it to people because I really think it's a great sort of very early days breakdown that jibes very well with where we still are today. And you were talking about AR and VR maybe not moving along as quickly as you thought they might. I feel like that happened to these folks talking about AI in 1960 and certainly in 1956, which is when this article says the term artificial intelligence in thinking along these lines was actually coined. So I bring it up just because I think to set the stage for the topic today is that while many things have changed since 1960, some of the big problems and challenges are still very much there. And I think that is a good segue into our talking about your send about human-augmented AI. Tell us about augmenting versus, is it replacement? Is that the terminology you used?
I think the call is, well, there are two schools. I don't want to get too overly technical, but back then at MIT, Marvin Minsky was pushing a school of AI and developing the first neural network. And he seems to be linked to a school of thinking that says this stuff should replace human endeavor. We'll all sit around under apple trees and meet our Adams and Eves, and life will be good because we don't have to work, and machines will take care of everything. The West Coast, a little later, there was a school primarily started by Doug Engelbart and a few other pretty bright people. They said, no, humans need to stay in the loop at all times. If you remove us from the loop, the very meaning of what it is to be a human being disappears. And that argument led to several things. You could say the years where everybody stopped doing AI, Minsky incited that with what is called the AI winter in the early 2000s. But we are still doing things with all the variations of machine learning and pattern recognition and big data that was being talked about and being perceived then. The video that you showed, the things that freaked out viewers in 1960 should still be freaking people out now. There is this point where technology could do all the thing that it's not even close to doing yet. Understanding sarcasm, feeling emotions, actually cheering for a team rather than pretending to do these things. That is inching forward at a speed that's probably equal to the technical difficulties that have made virtual reality less than the household must-have item that I predicted it would be back in 2016. We're still dealing with enormous ethical issues about the meaning of what it is to be a human, while we're still having technologists doing what technologists have always done, which is inventing shit because they can. It's the same reason whales jump, 100-ton whales or whatever they weigh, jump out of the ocean. Because why? The scientists say it's because they're itchy from barnacles. I think they do it because they can. And you give a good engineer a problem and say it can't be done and give them the tools to make it doable for the first time ever, they're going ahead and doing it. And they're going to go ahead and do it because that's what it's all about. That's where the financial opportunities are. That's where the intellectual challenges are. But there's no one at any point in the equation saying, should we do that? You know, what happens to humans when they don't drive cars anymore? Yeah, I know 30,000 people will be saved every year, but we're not quite sure that's how it's going to come out. As it's been pointed out several times, there are these unknown unknowns that seem to keep popping up and keep slowing that down. But what has happened with AI is it's become like oxygen, as I think I said a few minutes ago. It's everywhere. It's going into all things. It is supposedly helping humans in all ways, but nobody's asking us humans. Corporations are doing what corporations should do, which is serve shareholder needs. And if the competition's doing this stuff, they better do it, and they better hire better technologists to do it faster and bigger so they can be more profitable. But at the end of that, you have some pretty knowledgeable people like Elon Musk, there's a whole list of them, Bill Gates, who have started to express concerns about where AI is taking us.
What are your specific concerns along those lines? What's your biggest one? Because it appears you have a few.
Yeah, I could write a book about what I have.
Yeah.
I think if humans are out of the loop, the machines start serving machines. The science fiction writers of the past, I think Ray Bradbury had a short story. It wasn't even his best, but I think I can do it in about a paragraph, which is And it came to pass in the 23rd century that a great machine was built by all the scientists and seers of the world. And the machine would be equipped to know all things that all humans had knew then and had always known, and to that were added things that they may soon know. And during the time the machine was built, a big war was ensued, and all of humankind, almost all of humankind, was wiped out. So there was still only one person left, and he was the keeper of this machine. Sorry for the sexism, but Bradbury wrote this in the 50s. And he finally got the machine to work. And into it, he asked the question, the universal question that all of humankind had wanted to know, and that question is there a God? And the machine hesitated for a second, and from the screen, a lightning bolt came out and zapped the last human on Earth. And then it zapped the place where the machine was plugged into a socket in the wall and said, there is one now.
Wow. That's, chilling.
That was a life changer for me when I was about 10 years old. That brought me into the thinking of Isaac Asimov and the fact that robots were definitely going to come and their purpose needed to serve humans. Because if they didn't serve humans, they would become more efficient and capable of replacing humans. And the logic would say if we were now inefficient, to make the planet more efficient, they should eliminate us. And we could go in that direction. We had the same argument when we started having astronauts. You'll remember, well, maybe you've read or saw The Right Stuff, but we were going to put monkeys into outer space, and we started off putting monkeys into outer space until the Russians put a real human up there and got much better PR than we were getting with our monkeys. And our best pilots would say, well, we don't want to be astronauts. We're pilots. We fly planes. We don't want to be spamming a can. We don't want to just sit there. And that debate ended up giving us heroes or astronauts. And now as time goes on, we're starting to replace them again because humans get old and die and machines don't. And so when we start exploring outer space, it's inefficient and unwise. We'll have to colonize Mars first and then start breeding babies to go to Jupiter and so on into outer space. So I'm afraid of the future of humankind. I think there is a real danger. It has always seemed unlikely. It's always seemed somewhat sci-fi-ish. But we keep taking steps in that direction. I watch very closely the debate about fully autonomous cars. You might have guessed that by this point that I'm not a believer in them. I love putting little Facebook pictures of things that we're up to with these cars and then asking the question, what can possibly go wrong? And when I get great answers every time, and many of them are really funny, and I notice you laugh.
Yes, because there's always something that can go wrong.
Yeah, there is always something going on. Sully Sullenberger, I forgot his real first name, but he was the pilot on US Air 1514, The Miracle on the Hudson. Mm-hmm. Had he done what the computer told him to do, he would have flown to an airport that he could not possibly have reached. Instead, he ignored the instructions he was getting from flight control that was listening to a computer and did something that the computer never would have thought of. He did something very human. He says, I'm going to land on the Hudson River. And he did something that machines couldn't do because he had all this experience. He was a pilot's pilot. He knew exactly how to land it. And he took a I think it was something like a 375,000 to one shot, and he landed it properly, and nobody was landed, and he became a hero. Would we have given the ticker tape parade that we gave to Sully to R2-D2 if he had landed on the? I mean, we humans are about human endeavors. We're about mental challenges. We're about competing with each other. We're about either destroying or saving the planet, depending on what side prevails. And most of us think that it's too close to call right now, and that scares the hell out of us. But why should we be scared if everything can go on just fine without us? If our little clones can see how much moisture is needed in the irrigation by the wheat field, so we don't need farmers out there anymore. And they can just stay home and, I guess, trust our government to take care of us, because if machines are doing all the work, I'm not sure I guess our government wouldn't exist anymore, because we could have machines to make all the right decisions. What could possibly go wrong with that?
I think you're spinning out a number of sci-fi plots that someone can pick up on and follow in the footsteps of Ray Bradbury. So let's
I
go ahead.
keep trying to do that, except I keep trying to write nonfiction, and the line between the two is getting very, very blurred.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about nonfiction for a moment, and this concept that you've been discussing, especially with your Sully example, of augmenting AI with humanity. And I have a bunch of questions about that. I want to get into the specific example of this security company that you highlighted, which is called, what is it called again?
Deep Sentinel.
Yes, Deep Sentinel out of Pleasanton.
Sounds a little racy, doesn't it?
It does. Yes, I feel like they were inspired by DeepMind and then called it Deep Sentinel. Yeah. But it's based in Pleasanton. And so they're doing something pretty interesting and very commonsensical as far as I'm concerned, because one of you mentioned, your biggest fear is sort of very apocalyptic. My biggest fear could go that way. But in the more short term, it's more what you're alluding to with self-driving cars, that we're in a rush to implement these technologies and put them in planes and cars and things and businesses, and have them, as you say, they're like air, having decisions made by machines that are programmed by humans and, taught their machine learning methodologies by humans that are biased and imperfect themselves. I feel like all this stuff is far from being ready for prime time. Maybe not quite as far, but comparatively speaking, still pretty far away, like we were in the 60s. And yet, as you say, it's becoming air. So that's my concern, is that we're in a rush. And I love this concept of a company deciding, and in the case of airlines, of course, it's a matter of safety and concern, that we're going to use these tools, but we're going to make sure that there are checks and balances on them. So tell us about Deep Sentinel and how they're doing that.
Well, I could read you the article, but that would be cheating. And I wrote it a couple of months ago, so I may be off on some of my details. And excuse me, I have an allergy and I keep coughing into the microphone, and somewhere in the background there's a guy who's falling off his chair and holding his ears in pain every time I do it. And I do apologize. It's not that bad. Anyway, he began this company because he was trying to find a burglar alarm system for his home after his baby was born. And he discovered that they don't work right. They don't work as the people who install them think they do. They don't warn the police. The police aren't going to come. And the people who are supposed to be watching your home on monitors have no training about how to watch for a bad guy, have no way of intervening when a bad guy comes. And they just, burglar alarm companies make money. And the police write these reports and they go into file folders. I guess they're now virtual folders, and nothing ever happens. And he has the stat to back it up. So he decided he would improve human intervention with Deep Sentinel, where he has former cops who sit in a room and behave sort of like you see actors playing Secret Service people on West Wing doing. Their job is to protect this property. And if they see an intruder come to your porch, they don't have to alert the police. They start talking and say, hey, what are you doing there? Why are you picking up that package? That package isn't for you. And the person says, oh, you're a recording. I don't trust you. And they say, oh, yeah, how do I know that you're wearing a red shirt and tan pants? Mm-hmm. So what he has done that interests me the most is he has reinserted the human into the home security loop just when everybody is getting nicely, happily relaxed, that they are protected by, I won't name any of the burglar alarm companies, there's only a couple of them. And if you're using them, I suggest you call up your local police department and ask them how they treat burglar alarm footage.
Yeah.
Because what they get is an analog videotape that they're supposed to sit and study about a crime that by the time they get it, several days have gone by and the criminal is out of the neighborhood. And the quality of it is grainy anyway, and the lighting is bad anyway, so they don't have anything that they can use unless by coincidence the same guy, same height and build, same outfit, is apprehended some other time. And the police would prefer to be riding in patrol, but of course his budget cut back. So unless you live in the highest crime area, your burglary will go undetected because the police don't patrol affluent neighborhoods anymore like they used to. I think the story is important because these kind of adjustments need to be made. The idea of the autopilot in a car or cars with no steering wheel all begins with the car being taken over by AI and leaving the human to supervise the car. And that's why we're starting to get an increasing number of videos showing the person being paid to supervise falling asleep. Same reason we fall asleep when we're riding on buses or in trains or in airplanes. We're not doing anything but sitting there. And humans don't do good work that way. When they have the wheel, when the foot is near the brakes and the gas pedal, and they're going down a crowded street and there's a shadow behind that car over there, they get fully awake. Our chemistry starts pumping adrenaline. Our heart starts beating. Our eyes get larger. Our pupils do the reverse of whatever dilation is. And we're paying attention. We're eliminating what makes humans different from either machines or other animals. We're eliminating that combination you talked about between our ability to learn fast, and our instincts. I don't know that we can define where cognition comes in and instincts go out. There is something in our wiring that AR doesn't come close to. I said AR, I mean AI.
Sure.
We don't come close to that anymore. We don't understand it, and yet there is this rush. And I am all for business. I'm pro-business in lots of ways, except we have a problem that the purpose of a corporation is to increase shareholder equity. And that means they need to get the thing out faster than their competitor does. And that means to get the thing out, they need to round corners, if not just cut them off completely. And when they round corners, they increase risk. risks that machine learning tells us, or big data tells us, is very, very minimal, but we don't know. Going back to Sully's line, there are too many unknown unknowns. When we remove the steering wheel from a car, a lot of things changes, and all those engineers can sit around all they want, but they won't know what really is going to happen until it happens. They test millions and millions of miles of highways, usually in rural areas of Arizona, near deserts.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been to Rome, where there's that very famous rotary near the Colosseum,
Yes.
where there's absolute pandemonium? There's motorcycles and pedestrians, there's dogs walking, there's all this craziness going on. There's a car going in the other direction, and miraculously, they almost never have an accident there. That's because humans are there. They know this is different than anywhere else in Rome. They know that there's danger here. They're doing human things. They're paying attention. They're looking for things that they shouldn't be expecting to happen. Machines don't do that. They calculate probabilities. They're based on things that have already happened, and they recognize patterns. But patterns are filled with surprises when humans are involved, because we humans are wonderfully surprising. That wonderfully surprising can easily get us killed. There is a time that's going to come in the near future, and this is a little off subject, but it is related. I think we're going to have more drivers killed through texting than through drinking or using other drugs behind the wheel. We humans know it's dangerous to do that behind the wheel. There have been campaigns, advertising campaigns, Mothers Against Drug and Driving, that have reduced the amount of imbibing behind the wheel. So that number's going down. Meanwhile, I think last year, 10,000 Americans died because somebody was texting while driving. What's going on here? What's going on here is we had an unknown unknown. When we all got our phones and we found out we could text people by using their phone numbers, and we had a whole new way of talking to our friends, we didn't think that one of these days, just answering that comment that you just noticed on your phone holder while driving, and you just click and you hit like as a baby steps out, as a stroller rolls out from in front of a car, and you're going by at a comfortable 35 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone.
Yeah.
That's an unknown unknown. And that's one I can name because that's already happened.
Right.
But what happens when we have these cars not driving around Tempe, but driving around Beijing or Rome or London or any other crowded, congested place where there is a confluence of pedestrians, bicyclists, skateboarders, roller skaters, animals that are unleashed? We just don't know what's going to happen. And if we take our time and do it right, and gradually over generations reduce the role of the human, we're going to still kill a whole lot of people. And all these people who've crunched numbers and tell us we're going to immediately save 30,000 Americans each year, and I don't know the global number, once we have all these cars. They haven't even considered what happens how do we create automated cars sharing a highway with with human-driven cars? Do we have separate lanes? Do we start reducing the lanes that humans have the right to drive a car in? Do we eventually have highways that we must build that are only for automated cars? How many details have not even been looked at? Why are certain, anyway, I'm babbling rather than conversing, so I'll stop and let you talk.
You're raising really good points, and I do have questions about them. My primary question, as we talk about, the fact that I think both of us kind of feel like self-driving cars are coming quickly, and there are going to be lots of issues with them. And in the framework of this concept of human-augmented AI, the Deep Sentinel scenario works really well for that because we're talking about cameras pointing not into somebody's private life, but outside their home into a public space, where then, I think just about everybody can feel pretty good about, okay, well, if there's something against the law or about to be against the law that's going to transpire there, and there's a way to intervene and sort of pre-crime that and make sure it doesn't happen, or at least, discourage it from happening, that's a good thing. But I have a harder time coming up with a scenario for how a human-augmented AI solution works for self-driving cars. Are we constantly going to have cameras on the driver determining whether they're paying attention and overseeing the AI's functions? I don't think anybody's going to buy into that. Do you have another kind of solution that might work?
No.
So
next question.
Yep. I don't know that I do either, but I think that this concept of human augmented AI is a good one, but it's the down in the details that it might get sticky.
The devil, they used to say God is in the details and the devil is in the details. Maybe that's the same power. I don't know. Yeah. But I do know that there is no machine on Earth that's anywhere close to understanding the variables of human behavior. And we can look at the situation now and freak out at how many humans are getting killed by cars every year. Well, the truth of the matter is that number was closer to 55,000 back in the 60s when that video you showed earlier was around. So cars are getting safer. We don't use AR, we use seatbelts. That was a big one. We reduced speed limits on highways back when we had an energy crisis. We thought that would be the energy crisis. And that actually saved lives too. But now we have this thing, our machines, we have deep learning. We can go out and change the world. And there's all kinds of institutions buying in. Insurance companies would much rather have lawsuits against Ford Motors than against you or me. And if there's nobody driving the car, obviously the car maker is going to be at fault. The construction industry is all for it because there's going to be retrofitting going on highways everywhere. There's all kinds of economic interests. But how many years will it take before what we learn kills fewer than 30,000 people on the highway every year in America through having no humans driving than now? I think that goes beyond the lifespan of my great-grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And I don't see how you fix that without real-time driving, real-time autonomous driving in a variety of situations which are not being done. Very little autonomous driving has been done in cities, and the results of that have not been as forthcoming as I would have thought they would be. There have been a lot of companies who were pretty sure they were ready to do this, and they backed off. Some of them know a lot about cars, Toyota being one of them. Whether this is Tuesday or Thursday means Tesla is either for or against fully autonomous cars. I don't know which it is on a Friday. So I don't see any time in my youngest grandchild is 10. I expect she's going to live longer than me, so let's make her 120 years. I don't see any time in that period when we will have solved the problems of fully autonomous cars. Do you?
I think that we will have solved some of them, but that others will present themselves that we haven't even thought of yet.
Yes.
And yes, and
We
on we go.
We started that before we got into AI. We had cruise control. We still have, and I thought it was a marvel of science that when I was on cruise control and my car came up too close to the car in front of me, it slowed down. And that was really neat. But now I don't know what we're supposed to solve here. I just don't.
So anecdotally, I drive a Ford Explorer, a fairly current one, and it has that adaptive cruise control feature. And recently it did a software update where it added lane keeping, and it didn't tell you. It just it updated itself, and then all of a sudden you got a graphic on the dashboard that were little dashed lines showing you where the lane lines were. And if you were drifting too far to the right or left, they would go progressively yellow and then red, and they were green if you were smack dab in the middle of the lane. And there's also there's two things that go on. I think there's haptic feedback in the steering wheel that tells you, hey, you need to get back over to the middle. And also it will steer itself back to the middle if you don't take the cue. And I'm not quite sure how it determines when you're changing lanes, not to keep you from changing lanes, but it seems to manage that okay. But I found it kind of annoying because all of a sudden it was just there and I'm not used to it being there. So I turned it off initially. And then I turned it back on because I have a 15-year-old who's learning to drive. And I just wanted him to have that little extra incentive to be in the right place in the lane. So, I mean, I think it's useful. It's inconsistent. It's one of those things where it doesn't work all the time. There are times when you see the lane lines and it's functioning, and there are times when it doesn't. So I think that's not real helpful. If you just learn to ignore it all the time, then it's not, a useful bit of technology.
You did a very human thing. You got something new, it intruded on your habits, and you turned it off.
Mm-hmm.
What if you weren't allowed to turn it off?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
how would you feel as a human?
I would have liked not being able to turn it off for sure. And I like having the option of having the human judgment in this situation. And with this driver, I would like to have it on.
And the second thing that you mentioned is the nature of technology as we have always known it. You said it works okay sometimes, but it doesn't work all the time. Okay. And that's interesting because you and I have been around the computer business for a long time. Do you remember how marvelous things were till we realized they sucked when they first came in? Do you remember the daisy wheel printers?
Yes,
and then once we were used to them, we realized they weren't quite as good as we thought they were. And so innovation came in. Now the innovation's coming in faster than we decide. Innovation is coming in faster than we are getting accustomed to what was innovated previously. Mm-hmm. Did I say that right? Yeah, I think I said that right.
Yes, I think I understand exactly what you mean. And it's funny because before the show, I was thinking about how you've been paying attention to cutting edge technologies for so many years that, at the time they were all cutting edge, but like daisy wheel printers, you've seen a lot of things come and then become old hat, as have I. And
when I was still a beat reporter at the Quincy, Massachusetts Patriot Ledger, I wrote a headline that said "An End to Carbon Paper," because we no longer, these computers weren't going to mean that we had to use carbon paper between. Most people listening to the show don't even know what I'm talking about. But there were people who said, I like carbon paper. And they stuck with it.
I think those people just liked how it smelled.
Yeah, it could be. But we could have a lot of fun with this, but I have a serious point in it. The point is we have controlled our own personal adoptions. We have adopted new technologies when we've wanted to. Very often we get it from our friends and we see they're doing well with it. And now we have a friend who becomes our computer buddy, our tech buddy. All of that is becoming as obsolete as the carbon paper. We're now getting technology taking over for us without our permission, without our control. And we're heading in a direction where that is going to become more and more the case. And that scares me. That scares me not only for the danger of it, but the psychological effect on us. I remember a case I followed many years ago. I forgot what year, but it was many years ago. But it was a teacher in Oregon, which is a pretty progressive state, who refused to allow her 8th grade students to use Google in preparing term papers. She wanted them to go to the library and use the Dewey Decimal System as the good Lord intended.
Mm-hmm.
And this seemed like a very funny case. But there was a trial, and I followed the trial, and she says, what will happen when we learn things so easily that you don't need libraries? Will you then not need teachers? And of course, in China, we have virtual teachers coming through VR headsets now. Yes. And it's just an experiment. I think 2 million children are learning this way. And they do pretty good things. When the kid gets bored, the kid gets a pop test thrown in front of their eyes. And the machine teaches each child at the rate that child's capable of learning. So it sounds pretty good, but how do you feel about your child never having a human teacher? What does that do to the human that is your child?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And in fact, we need to thank our sponsor for this episode of This Week in Law. But when we come back, Shel, and we've been talking about autonomous cars and various other technologies using AI. There are some obvious ones that we're all familiar with that are touching our lives. Google seems determined to have AI help us make restaurant and haircut appointments. I don't know why they prioritize that so much. Microsoft seems determined to have AI help us iron out our calendar conflicts, which is a nice thing, maybe a little bit more practical. But when we come back from thanking our sponsor, think a little on this while I'm doing this. I'd love to know from you, Shel, other areas where you're seeing AI. You know, we've been talking about it. It's in its air, where maybe people haven't really thought of yet that there's AI incorporated into something they use every day. So think on that. And in the meantime, this episode of Triangulation is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. As you know, hiring can be a very slow process. Cafe Altura's COO, Dylan Miskovitz, needed to hire a director of coffee for his organic coffee company, but he was having trouble finding qualified applicants. So you know what he did? He switched to ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its technology identifies people with the right experience and invites them to apply for your job. So you get qualified candidates fast. Dylan posted his job on ZipRecruiter and said he was impressed by how quickly he had candidates apply. He used the candidate rating feature in ZipRecruiter to filter his applicants and was able to focus on the most relevant ones. And that's how Dylan found his new director of coffee in just a few days. With results like that, it's no wonder that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the very first day. ZipRecruiter makes hiring easy. It makes your business more efficient. You need to see for yourself, though, why ZipRecruiter is effective for businesses of all sizes. So that's why we're here. Try ZipRecruiter for free at our web address, ziprecruiter.com/triangulation. That's ziprecruiter.com/triangulation. ZipRecruiter.com/triangulation. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. So I think just thanking our sponsor there gives us one field where AI could certainly be important, matching up people who are seeking employment with those who have jobs to offer. What else came to mind, Shel?
Well, you cued me, and I was going into something that is somewhat zipless, but
Mhm.
I when I said it's like oxygen, let me give just a few examples of places where AI is coming into play. Philips is working on a toothbrush that will detect a sensor in the toothbrush. I don't know exactly how it will work. Will detect a cavity. And not only will it alert you, it will wirelessly alert your dentist. And of course, every dentist in the world is going to be telling his or her patients to use this toothbrush because, the sooner as it detects a cavity, he's got more revenue coming in. This isn't necessarily a bad one, but it's an example of how ubiquitous it will be. Milk producers are going to be putting sensors inside milk cartons so that it will be able to alert you when your milk is going sour and you better go out and buy fresh milk. I'm about to write a story that I really like about a company called Apollo Neuro. I think they launched while I was writing. I don't follow launches that closely, but it's a wristband that uses Eastern meditation type methodologies, along with I forgot which type of artificial intelligence, but along with AI, to be able to treat post-stress traumatic disorder, schizophrenia, all sorts of mental disorders that are related insomnia, whatever is related to stress. The wristband doesn't beep or anything. Thank you. I'm going to be using that very same picture. It emits a vibration, the kind of vibration that meditators are supposed to achieve. I was never very good at meditation, and they didn't even have smartphones back when I tried it. But the company has merged neuroscience and AI with Eastern meditative processes. And I think you're going to see things like that happening, and I think they are for the better. I think it's far better than something that you are going to wear on your wrist that will decide how to adjust your medication for you, or will report to your doctor for you, or AI that will know before you do that you have a terminal disease. And since your insurance is covered by your employer, we'll report it to them before to you and your family. So I think AI is going to be in everything. We have two countries, China and Great Britain, who are using AI to observe its population everywhere. In China, they've started to give every citizen a score, and of course, you'll get a nicer house with a higher score, which the Chinese government will decide. Right now, it's being used to stave off terrorism in London, which sounds like a very good thing. But now that the system's all installed, what else will the government decide to do? Of course, there's no great fluctuations in the British government. It's all very stable over there. So we don't have to worry about that, do we?
Back to education, there was a funny comment in IRC. Aspire in there was saying, as you were posing the question, do we really want our kids educated by virtual teachers? And Aspire says, well, that's the way Spock was taught as a child, so that can't be so bad. But sort of picking up on that, it does seem to me like there could be a great sort of diagnostic role for AI in education, because people learn differently and fall down at different parts of their education. It would be great if education could be tailored to their particular needs by figuring out what those are in real time, how you're not understanding, and then somehow augmenting your instruction in a way that's going to be really well suited to you. That seems like something I'd like to see happen if we could do that.
I could write a book on this one too.
Yeah.
For example, when you learned history, I bet you had to memorize a bunch of dates. I bet you still know that William the Conqueror signed something in 1099 and caused all kinds of good stuff to happen, but I'm not quite sure what it was or where it was. But now you can use VR to have the kids visit any historic site. Take a tour of Buckingham Palace or the White House. Well, go to Buckingham Palace. Don't go to the White House these days. But in all of these cases, you can have children tour the Great Barrier Reef and understand why pollution is destroying it. You can do all these marvelous things. All I say is whatever they are, whatever tools you're using, and the examples I'm giving there converge my two passions of immersive technologies and AI. Every example there does. But humans are still in the loop. When you remove humans from the loop, when you stop using technology to augment us, but to replace us, you're redefining everything. You're redefining the human role on the planet. You hit a point when the machines are the only things capable of creating better machines. And in each of these betterments, you're reducing the need for humans. Instead of improving climate, why not eliminate the need for climate? Just have machines. Get rid of all living things.
Oh, dear.
That could follow logically, could it not? That sounds like science fiction. But so much of the science fiction that shaped me when I was a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old, we've already surpassed. The Martian Chronicles, that's very likely to happen after Elon succeeds in colonizing Mars.
Right.
We are going somewhere. We're investing trillions of dollars. We're raising the best and brightest of new generations, all heading into an uncharted light between darkness and light, an uncharted region between darkness and light called the Twilight Zone. And in the Twilight Zone, it's very unclear just what the prevailing force will be. And who controls the prevailing force? Yeah, go ahead.
No, absolutely. That's, of course, not only what the force is, but who controls it is incredibly important. And I guess that sort of leads right into my last question for you, Shel, which is, we can identify these problems and know that there need to be safeguards that aren't just driven by delivering value to shareholders. And that's where our government and our laws and regulations come in. In that podcast that you did for the XR podcast, you were talking at one point about smart speakers listening to things, and in general, a company like Amazon knowing not only sort of ambiently what's going on, but also all these other details about you, like everything that you've purchased. And it occurred to me when I was listening to that, but wait a second, they're not going to know everything that you purchased, because there are some things that you simply can't purchase with Amazon, like alcohol. So it won't know if you've bought several cases of beer lately, because there's a law that's coming at that situation obliquely and was never designed to curb Amazon knowing things about you. It was designed to curb minors from getting alcohol, and it makes it difficult to have alcohol delivered to your house without having a 21-year-old sign for it, et cetera, et cetera. So companies wash their hands of that, and Amazon in particular doesn't sell it. So that's an instance where we have a law that's already in the books that's sort of acting as a check on a problem, and it never was designed for that. But I'm wondering what you think about how lawmakers, if they're equipped to make decisions about how we address these problems, and if you think that we're in an era where they're actually trying to do that.
This may be a cheap shot, but whenever I'm asked about lawmakers being in a position to decide, I remember the embarrassing moment when Dianne Feinstein asked Mark Zuckerberg the difference between Facebook and America Online.
Ouchie.
Regulators look at existing problems, and sometimes they do a good job of regulating for the safety of people. But when something is new and different and the dangers of it are unknown, it is very hard to trust our government. Even if we had a virtuous government, a corruption-free government, a government filled with people who are passionate about serving the public interest, how the hell are they going to figure out fake news impacting an American election for president? I don't know what government's role is, and I am convinced that at this point in our history, our government is even more broken than our technological master plans. And I say this with great sorrow because I vowed all my life I would never become an old guy sitting in front of a camera and saying, it ain't like it used to be. But there are things that used to be that have changed inalterably and are hard to fix. Reputation. Our reputation used to be based upon a community that was within our geographic parameters. Now our reputations have things called personal brand and are distributed through networks that Bob Metcalf, whose law prevails over networks, had no idea were going to come out. I really don't know how to fix the problems I'm talking about. I'm hoping someone smarter than me hears some of the things that I rant about and figures out ways to fix them. How can AI make our government, let's say better? Better is one of those soft words that doesn't say anything, but how can it improve our government's ability to serve and defend its population? I don't know.
Well, I think the point that you've made about having humans in the loop is going to be critically important, whether it's something that's governmentally required or encouraged, or we figure it out because it's just the best thing to do. And I think a great example of that is if you don't have, if you need to make the point to people, what happens when you don't have humans in the loop? Just point them to the YouTube algorithm that constantly recommends videos for you when you've watched a few, and ask people how well they think that works.
How about Facebook advertising? That's contextual advertising. Yeah. They're supposed to know what I want. And if Eric Schmidt were in the conversation, he'd say, Google wants to anticipate what you're going to ask before you ask it. How are they doing so far?
Yeah. Not that great. But Shel, this has been wonderful getting together with you here today. I really appreciate your time and your insights, and you're taking time away from writing and the other important things you're doing in your life. It's just been a joy to sit down and talk with you. This was a lot of fun, and I hope I get back onto Twitter without 4 more years going by. As do I. Let's make sure that happens. Yeah, you were good. You went to the library, and now you know what I said in 2013. I have to take your word for it. And I encourage people to go back into our archives and find Shel's previous episode of Triangulation. I can tell you which episode that is real quick. Hold on. Before we go, Phil, I have to find the email. Here we go.
I won't dance. Don't ask me.
There we go. You were on episode 127. So if folks want to go.
And I would like to close by introducing, this is an analog device that can actually allow me to copy down 127 onto a piece of sliced tree. It's a remarkable technology, and I advise you try using it every now and then.
I do. My handwriting's getting so bad because I type so much more than I write now, but I will try, Shel. I will try. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. And thank you all for joining us here on Triangulation. We record the show every Friday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. Please join us live if you can. If you can't, don't worry about it. Head on over to twit.tv/triangulation. And you will find Shel's old episode there, as well as all the old episodes of Triangulation and the current ones as well. So you can enjoy those on your own time, on your own device, however you need to interact with our technologies. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week on Triangulation. Until then, take care.